So picture Britain in the 1760s. They just finished fighting France for control of basically all of North America, and they won. Great news, except wars are expensive, and Britain is now broke. Like, embarrassingly broke. So King George III looks at his map, sees 13 colonies full of people who've never once been asked to pay British taxes, and goes, "Oh, hello there. This is the Stamp Act of 1765. It taxes paper, all paper. Newspapers, playing cards, legal documents, wedding certificates. If you touched paper in America, Britain wanted a cut, which, translated, means we don't mind paying taxes. This is called the Declaratory Act, and it is essentially Britain saying, I could tax you if I wanted to. I'm not saying I will. Nobody in the history of relationships has ever said that sentence and had it go well. So then comes the Townshend Acts, taxing glass, paint, paper again, and tea. And the colonists, who have now discovered that organized boycotts actually work, start refusing to buy British goods. Boston becomes the epicenter of all of this, mostly because Boston has always had main character energy. British troops get sent in to keep order, which goes about as well as you'd expect. And in 1770, a confrontation between soldiers and a rowdy crowd throwing snowballs and insults ends with British troops opening fire. 5 colonists die. Colonial propaganda immediately renames this the Boston Massacre, which 5 deaths is genuinely tragic. But massacre also does a lot of heavy lifting here. Paul Revere makes an engraving of the event that is dramatically inaccurate and extremely effective, because it turns out propaganda has always worked and always will. Then, 1773, the Tea Act. Britain gives the East India Company a monopoly on tea sales in the colonies, which actually makes tea cheaper, but the colonists are not mad about the price. They're mad about the principle, which by this point has become the emotional theme of this entire relationship. So on December 16th, a group of colonists dress up as Mohawk Native Americans, not a great look in retrospect, sneak onto 3 British ships in Boston Harbor, and dump 342 chests of tea into the water, 92,000 pounds of tea. Gone? This is the Boston Tea Party, and Britain's response is basically, oh, you want to destroy property. Enter the Course of Acts, which colonists immediately and correctly rebrand as the Intolerable Acts, because subtlety was never going to survive this conflict. Boston Harbor gets shut down entirely, no ships in, no ships out, until the tea is paid for. Massachusetts self-government gets basically dissolved. And to top it off, British soldiers get housed in colonists' homes. Whether the colonists like it or not, Britain thought this would isolate Massachusetts and scare the other 12 colonies into behaving. Instead, it does the exact opposite. All 13 colonies look at what just happened to Massachusetts and go, that could be any of us next. And for the first time, they actually start acting like one unified thing instead of 13 separate colonies that occasionally argue about borders. This leads to the First Continental Congress in 1770. 4 delegates from 12 of the 13 colonies meeting to figure out what to do. Georgia doesn't show up, presumably because Georgia is going through something. The Congress agrees to boycott British goods entirely and start organizing local militias, just in case. Nobody's calling for independence yet. Most of these guys still think of themselves as British. They just want Britain to stop treating them like an ATM with legs. Then, April 1775, British troops march out of Boston toward Concord, officially to seize a colonial weapons stockpile. And word gets out because Paul Revere, a man with apparently one job in this entire story, rides through the night yelling that the British are coming. At Lexington, colonial militia, the Minutemen, so named because they could supposedly be ready to fight in 60 seconds, which is either impressive or a sign that everyone was just permanently on edge, face off against British regulars. Nobody knows to this day who fired first. Historians call it the shot heard round the world, which is a great line, and also nobody actually knows if that's literally true, but it sounds important, so it stuck. Fighting breaks out. The British push on to Concord, get met with more resistance, and end up retreating all the way back to Boston, while colonial militia snipe at them from behind trees and stone walls the entire way, which was considered wildly ungentlemanly at the time because apparently there were rules about how you're supposed to shoot at people. The British lose around 250 men on that retreat. The war has unofficially just started. 2 months later, Bunker Hill technically fought on Breed's Hill because even the battles in this war can't get simple facts straight. The British win, technically, they take the hill, but it costs them over 1,000 casualties against roughly half that on the colonial side. A British general reportedly says something along the lines of another victory like this, and we're finished, which is the sort of thing you say when you've won so badly it basically counts as losing. Meanwhile, the Second Continental Congress is meeting, and they've got a war on their hands whether they officially wanted one or not, so they appoint a Virginia planner named George Washington to command the newly formed Continental Army. Washington's main qualifications: he looks extremely serious in a uniform, he's tall, and he's from Virginia, which helps balance out the fact that this rebellion so far has been extremely Massachusetts-coded. His actual military record up to this point is, generously, mixed. But he's about to spend 8 years proving that showing up, staying alive, and refusing to quit counts for more than people think. By July 1776, the Congress has had enough of pretending this is a disagreement instead of a divorce, and they issue the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson writes most of it, borrowing heavily from Enlightenment philosophy and, unofficially, from the general vibe of a very long breakup text. We hold these truths to be self-evident is a genuinely beautiful piece of writing. It's also written by a man who owned enslaved people while writing about how all men are created equal, which is a contradiction this country would spend the next roughly 250 years and counting trying to reconcile. Now Washington has to actually win a war against the most powerful military on earth with an army that is underfaced, underpaid, and under everything. 1776 goes badly. New York falls. The army retreats across New Jersey, shrinking with every mile as enlistments run out and soldiers just go home. Morale is somewhere below sea level, and then, on Christmas night, Washington does something nobody expects. He crosses the icy Delaware River in the middle of the night and launches a surprise attack on Hessian mercenaries at Trenton. It works. It's a small victory in the grand scheme of things, but it's exactly the kind of victory a dying cause needed to convince everyone it wasn't dead yet. The war grinds on. 1777 brings the turning point at Saratoga. American forces surround and force the surrender of an entire British army. This is the moment France has been waiting for. France has been quietly funding the Americans already, mostly because France loves any opportunity to embarrass Britain. But Saratoga proves the Americans can actually win, and France formally enters the war as an ally. This turns a colonial rebellion into a global conflict, because now Britain has to worry about France, and eventually Spain and the Netherlands too, all piling on at once. Meanwhile, back with Washington's actual Army Valley Forge, winter of 1777 to 1778. No major battle here, just cold, disease, starvation, and roughly 2,000 soldiers dying from conditions rather than combat. This is the version of the war that doesn't make it into the inspirational paintings. But it's also where a Prussian officer named Baron von Steuben shows up and, despite barely speaking English, drills the Continental Army into an actual functioning fighting force. They walk out of that winter half, starved, but finally trained like real soldiers. The war drags into the South. The British shift strategy, figuring the southern colonies have more loyalists to rally. It works for a while. Charleston falls, but American forces, aided by increasingly effective guerrilla tactics from militia leaders who refuse to fight fair in the way European armies expect, wear the British down piece by piece. Then, 1780, Yorktown. British General Cornwallis digs in on a peninsula in Virginia, expecting the Royal Navy to resupply and evacuate him if things go wrong. Except this time, the French Navy gets there first and blockades the coast. Washington and French forces surround Cornwallis on land. He's trapped, outnumbered, and out of options. After a siege, Cornwallis surrenders. Legend has it the British band played a song called The World Turned Upside Down, which is either a remarkably self-aware choice or just a really unfortunate coincidence. And either way, it's a perfect closing line for 8 years of a global superpower, losing to a rebellion of farmers, lawyers, and one increasingly legendary Virginia planter. The fighting effectively ends there, though the official peace treaty, the Treaty of Paris, doesn't get signed until 1783. Britain recognizes the United States as an independent nation. 13 colonies that started this whole thing arguing about paper taxes have become one country, built on ideals it hasn't even come close to living up to yet and won't fully reckon with for centuries. But it exists. It won. And the guy who commanded the whole thing could have made himself king right then and there, and instead, he just went home to his farm. That's the part historians still can't quite get over. Not the war. The ending. A man wins the impossible and just walks away from the crown nobody even offered him. But everyone half expected him to take anyway.